All right, I'm going to go straight to this interview. I want to talk to Matt Bruenig because we had a hell of a conversation going on in our messages on Twitter, dealing with some of his articles, and we see this going on. And actually, I want to talk to him about a little feud that he had today with Joan Walsh. First of all, Matt, how are you doing, man?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks so much for joining us. And before I do too much, I know a little bit about your bio. I don't have a lot about your bio because you're an elusive man on the interwebs. But I do know that you are, of course, you write at mattbrunig.com, and you're also a policy analyst for demos.org or .com.
Demos.org is the website.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. So, anything else you want to tell us about yourself, or you want to just jump into this conversation?
They don't care what my bio is. Let's just go into the talk.
All right. All right. So I'm talking with Matt Bruenig, and I had a chance to read. I've been reading your blog a lot lately because I like that it's succinct, it's to the point, and it's data driven, and very pragmatic. And the articles that got my attention the most recently were the articles that you're doing on how white liberals and progressives treat the white working class. And they reject the white working class because they view the white working class as racist and bigots. And so they essentially demonize them. Whereas if you do I guess the equitable thing, you would do the same thing to every group that you can categorize that is a bigot, right? That have bigoted tendencies. And you compared it to the treatment that the progressive and the establishment, how they treat African Americans who are overwhelmingly conservative when it comes to LGBTQ rights and marriage equality. All right. And so on the one hand, you have progressives who are shunning the white working class because they're bigots and they're racist. But those same exact people, they don't shun African Americans, even though they're homophobic and bigoted. They embrace them. Tell me a little bit more about that premise and what you found.
So yeah, I mean, you summarized it pretty well. What I was interrogating was some pieces at Salon and Slate and Freddie DeBoer and Above the Line. There was this discussion online that maybe the West Virginia primary prompted
Yep.
that was kind of, saying, oh, well, white working class, lower class whites are racist. And the upshot almost being, to hell with them,
Hmm.
they have these problems. And of course, that's true. I think upper class whites are racist as well, but there's no denying that lower class whites have racism issues, and
Hmm.
that's a problem, and we got to figure that out. But that doesn't mean to me that, well, your problems don't matter if you're like we've seen mortality for like middle class whites, go way up because of obesity and drug abuse and suicide, and
Hmm.
we've seen stagnant wages and poverty and all these kinds of things. Like, those are still problems, even if the people who experience those problems might have views that we see as problematic.
Hmm.
And as an analogy to that, I said, look at, the African American community. They just the poll in 2015 opposed gay marriage 2 to 1.
Yep. Yep.
And liberals would call that sort of homophobic and, like, really problematic. But we don't say, hey, obviously it's not good that black people are getting mowed down by police and locked up and are, some of the poorest people in the country and job discriminate. I mean, just the whole gamut. We
Hmm.
don't say, well, you don't care about gays, I don't care about you and your problems.
Yeah.
That's not something we do
But that's
to
something we
them.
readily do with the white working class, and we say that, oh, we don't care about your economic plight because you're a racist bigot.
Right. And in one of my last post, there was a brief moment where I was trying to figure out, what's going on here, beneath the surface. What we have this seeming contradiction. Is there some way to resolve this contradiction and explain why there's this different treatment? And the idea I threw out there, which was actually proposed to me by Emmett Renson of Vox,
Hmm.
was that, well, basically this is almost a kind of political tribal calculation,
Mm-hmm.
the understanding is that lower class whites certainly vote more Republican than Democrat,
Mm-hmm.
and lower class blacks almost all vote Democrat. And so, you know, when
Yeah.
someone in your family, of your political family, basically is has problematic issues. You try to deal with them and maybe try to persuade them, but you don't cast them out.
Right.
Someone who's not in your family, maybe you're a little bit more willing to, be like, I don't care about your problems.
Yeah, and so as I was reading that, I'm like, I saw a roadblock. I saw multiple roadblocks why progressives have not turned on black people, right? Because one, progressives and liberals have for years used the language of racism against conservatives, right? We've cast this laid out narrative of the Republican Party just being batshit racist. And it's not just a narrative. Some of them are very much so racist. But it seems like a roadblock that you're going to run into as soon as you say anything about a black person. Because for the last 8 years, if you had any criticism of Barack Obama, you were a racist. So likewise, it would be extremely difficult for any progressive, LGBTQ or otherwise, to condemn the black community for their overly conservative views in regards to gay rights and LGBT and marriage equality, because it will instantly, you are running up against the somehow being called a racist. So to me, that was the first hurdle in a justification as to why LGBTQ activists and just progressives in general who aren't even gay or lesbian would never cross the black community in that way. And I like what you wrote, what you got from the gentleman at Vox, that the other side of that coin, in my opinion, is that it's a very calculated game, that they are willing to suffer this. They're willing to suffer something that they would consider bigoted for the sake of electoral expediency. What does that say to you? What do you think about that on a moral level, maybe, but even if just a pragmatic philosophical level?
Well, so one of the things that's interesting about that theory, if we suppose that theory is correct, and it seems plausible, there's the secondary question of how conscious are they of this? Because motivations operate on often subconscious level. So I don't know that they
Actively doing this.
Yeah, like I suspect it's just, you know, they don't say, oh, well, we need blacks to vote for us, so we got to kind of soft pedal this. Instead they build sort of justifications in their own mind. And you saw that a little bit with some of the stuff I quoted from 2008 when you had the Prop 8 stuff, where
Right.
there was just sort of all this text that was like, we need to reach out to them more. And you know what? We haven't dealt with their issues. The LGBT community is not dealing with racism. We have racism in our own ranks. We're not dealing, there was all this sort of language that came out that, allowed you to resolve that without just being like, well, we need blacks to vote for Democrats,
Right.
but we want to get gay rights. Maybe we can hold out, which is ultimately what they did, and we can get it through the courts or something. And I don't think it's calculated on that level. It's probably just resolved on
On
a
a
more
quick.
subconscious level.
I think, I mean, maybe you're giving them, however you want to. I think some people are doing this straight out calculation, right?
I
And
think
here,
it's cynical.
I'm more cynical than you are, right? So I think some of them are making that calculation because they know black people. To be honest with you, there's a lot of black people who are just one racist comment away from becoming Republican. I've actually heard many African Americans say this: if it wasn't for the racism of the Republican Party, they would become Republicans. So I think that there is a very calculated estimation on the part of some thought leaders and some political leaders on the Democratic side to say that we can't cross we can't cross the African American community on this issue, because if we do, we will run them directly into the arms of the Republican Party. Now, that's just coming from my perspective of being in years in the black church, years in the black politics, and just knowing that there's a good percentage of African Americans who are very conservative, and the only reason they are not in the Republican Party is because they view the Republicans as being racist. But I want to come up for air a little bit, because the real conversation that I think you're having, and correct me if I'm wrong, the real conversation that you're having with these articles, this series of articles on how we demonize the white working class, but we engage African Americans, even though we both have our groups have our own versions of bigotry. And this is not anecdotal. This is based on polling, our rejection of LGBTQ rights and marriage equality specifically. So it's not just this casual observation that you're making up. This is in the data. Black people are not pro-gay overwhelmingly. But I think the conversation that you're having is really shining a light on this, and forgive this class term, but this bourgeois white liberal who really has a condescending gaze on people who are they feel and view are lower than them, and they can express this condescension towards white working class people because electorally it doesn't cost them anything. But they couldn't possibly express this condescension towards poor black people because electorally it cost them their ass. That's the subtext that I read in your articles. Or am I reading too deeply into it?
That's I had not contemplated that, but that doesn't seem implausible to me. I mean, I grew up in Texas, and I was lower class white, and the upper class whites, they were definitely very racist, and they also didn't like white trash, as they termed it, and they would certainly seem more willing to publicly talk about white trash and how they didn't like that than they did racism. Though I would say they were equally hateful of both. So when you hear when you see some of the things they talk about with the lower class whites, they're uneducated or uncultured or whatever, right? There seems to be this they like NASCAR and crappy beer, and they watch, stupid shows, and there's this sense, you could say similar things if you wanted. I mean, that's just the nature of being lower class in societies. You have different cultural habits. You have less education. That's true of white people. That's true of poor black people. That's true of poor Latino people. They're living in different worlds, culturally and educationally. And so anything you're saying about poor white people, you could probably say about most poor black people when it comes to sort of lack of quote unquote sophistication and that kind of thing. So maybe maybe they just have disdain across the board for that lack of sophistication, like you said, and just feel comfortable when it comes to lower class whites.
Yeah, but think about it. You can absolutely say, let's just think culturally right now in 2016. Right now, it wouldn't cost me a thing to get out here and say that white racist trailer park trash, right? It might cost me a little bit because I'm trying to do this little show, right? It might cost me just a little. But if a white person who's just as progressive as me comes out and say, just switch out trailer park trash and say ghetto trash, holy shit, that's the end of their career. So even on a cultural level, if they have this condescension towards African Americans, who they view as bigoted anyway because we don't support LGBTQ rights and marriage equality more specifically, then it's something that they're culturally not able to really vent that anger that we see being vented towards poor white people and working class white people online and in the media and in print every single day. It's like a West Virginia opened up the floodgates of white progressives who absolutely loathe white poor people. What do you think?
Yeah, that's an excellent. You have persuaded me. I hadn't really considered that, but it's interesting to think from your perspective when you see people banging or beating up on white trash or whatever. To you in your brain, you're like, you know what? That's they probably think that of
They're,
black people as
exactly.
well.
They're only one
Yeah.
word. They're only one adjective away from saying it about me, right? So that's why
Right. Yeah.
when I see, and I don't really have a better term, and I hate to be redundant, but when I see bourgeois white, let me stop there, white liberals. Jumping down the throats of poor white people, many of whom I grew up next to. I know for a fact that kind of condescension is really only one adjective away from describing and being not describing but being applied to me. So I don't get when I see it done towards white poor people. I don't co-sign, and this is me. I'm just an oddball, right? I think there's some black people who co-sign on this, right, because it helps them alleviate the fact that we have been oppressed for many years. But for me, it's like, no, if this white person is going to be this hateful and mean towards this poor white person, then they are just a closed one door, behind smoke closed doors from talking about me in the same way. And so I just feel that they can't publicly express this, but they express it when I walk by and they lock their doors or they clutch their purse, and they're supposed to be a post-racial society. So, and this is what I read. I mean, honestly, when I read your work, this is what it start piecing together. So I thought that's what you were working towards in many ways, and actually, I honestly think that's what you may not be expressly saying, but the subtext of what you're saying really pieces that together for me. I'm sorry, but go ahead. Just talk a little bit more about that, and I want to also talk about some of the questions you were saying about how long this coalition can actually last when we have a coalition of people who are well-to-do and wealthy, and they're very suspicious of tax hikes, even for the purposes of programs that would help people in this coalition.
Sure. So one of the odd realities of U.S. politics is that the working class or lower class types are split across the parties in not even proportion, but they're not able to form a block in one party altogether, which is what you see in other countries, in the Nordic countries, which are the ones that I study. Certainly in the middle of the 20th century, almost everyone, if you were a laborer, a lower class laborer or a pensioner or whatever, you were in the Social Democratic Party, period.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were management or whatever, you were in the sort of right wing party. And if you were a farmer, they had like this farmers party, and they usually teamed up with the Social Democrats. Like there was a very clear coalition, and you could understand how everyone in those parties, how their interests meld. In the U.S., we have these weird parties where the Democrats have a lot of upper scale white people who are mostly socially liberal, but really are not that interested in
Mm-hmm.
upping taxes, and
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of Bloomberg types almost. And then you also just have a lot of poor people, especially black people and Latinos, but also some poor whites, a decent, I mean, we say that, poor whites are racist and they'll vote for Republicans, but, really it's 30, 40%, 30% of them will vote for Democrats. That's 1 in 3. It's not nobody,
Right. Right.
especially since whites are such a big portion of the overall population. And it's just this weird tension, and it's hard to see going forward how that's going to play out, because and Ross Douthat of all people was actually making this point on Twitter yesterday. The culture war stuff in some ways seems won. We have the transgender
Mm-hmm.
stuff still ahead of us, but that almost looks like for sure that's going to be won. It's not going to be a 20-year battle to
Right.
have gender neutral bathrooms. And so once you get past that point, what is it that binds,
Mm-hmm.
lower class, especially people of color, to upper class whites who are interested in social liberalism but don't,
Economically
there's nothing,
conservative. Yeah.
yeah, there's no social liberalism to be got. It's already been got.
Right.
So what are you going to do? Once the Republican kind of cleans out and becomes less, anti-gay or whatever, are you going to see them go over to the Republicans? Are they going to be more appealing to Republicans? Or I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on how the coalition would change?
I think the coalition is changing before our eyes right now. For that exact reason, because you have the rest of us, right? You have the working class, and not just the working class, but like the lower middle class and those who just live in paycheck to paycheck. You know, a lot of us are waking up to the fact that the Democratic Party is not really doing anything for us economically, but protecting and securing the those who make enough money to not want any additional tax hikes and not have any need for government programs for assistance, even if it's some type of student loan forgiveness. They make enough money; they've already paid off their student loans, right? So we're in a coalition that's not tenable economically. And you're right. Like, what happens when it's over socially, and all of these social bigots are pariah, right? So there's really going to be no reason for us to have this coalition. I think that's already started, because the way the Democratic Party has had to use everything and the kitchen sink to oppose Bernie Sanders, they have publicly, in my opinion, gone against any economic populism. Like, they have completely derided the concept of economic populism, to the detriment of their party, and now to the realization for the rest of us to say, you know, it's time for something different, or it's time for us to overtake this party, or it's time to do something, but we can't sit in this coalition quietly anymore. And the irony of it is, Donald Trump is helping to expedite this by pushing away those Republicans who are not social pariah, you know, who are not, I mean,
Yes.
you know, he's pushing them you know, like the plague out of the Republican Party over into the Democratic Party. And now that's the party that should have existed in the first place, right? As you compare it to the Nordic countries, the party and it's not true to history, but just kind of by virtue of the names, you know, historically it was the Democratic Republican Party, or the Republican Democratic Party. I forgot which one was first, but they were together originally. And now it seems like it's time for them to get back together because economically, they're on the same page in many ways, give or take a few percentage points on the top marginal rate. Socially, they are merging, and Donald Trump is purging the Republican Party on that. And foreign policy, they are consistent on this, either a straight neoconservative policy or a soft neoconservative policy, but it's still a neoconservative foreign policy. So they have more in common than they would ever have with working class black people or working class white people who really are saying we're struggling. So to answer your question, I think it's happening right now before our eyes, and it's really being helped by Hillary Clinton being so far to the right, and Donald Trump pushing those people who were just close to center. They're pushing them into the arms of Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, the Donald Trump point is an interesting one. I don't. It's hard for me to think about how that's going to shake out. So the analysts say, you know, that Donald might push. You might like business conservatives, or they always
Hmm.
use suburban white women who are making, you know, 150 a year or something.
Jesus.
They'll go over into the Democratic Party,
Yep.
and because, you know, they can't deal with banned Muslims, and you
Right.
know, like that's
They
too
can't go
that's
that
too much
far.
for them.
Right. They
Right.
they can't go
But
far as
then that
building a wall.
changes.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right. But then that changes the Democratic composition, because now you have even more of that sort of upper class Bloomberg type that is, you know, in the coalition, and now you got to deal with those people. And how are you going to keep those people in once Donald gets out of the way? You got to keep ramping up the idea that we're never going to raise taxes on
Yeah.
anyone, you know, making less than, you know, $1 million or whatever. Um, you're
Eh,
gonna that it's gonna become even more precarious if the Dems expand their coalition by bringing those people in.
But it's going to become precarious for those of us further to the left who are demanding that the government actually promote the general welfare, right? Those of us who are saying use our tax dollars to make a better society, even for people who are on the margins economically. You know, it's precarious for us, but I think we've already
Oh,
found that it's already precarious just by virtue of this primary.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in the long run, it's gonna. In the short run, there's this issue of if they can bring those Donald Trump, the people who are repulsed by him over, then they can ignore the left even more,
Yep.
because they're able to build on that the
Yep.
right wing of the party. Uh, but then in the long run, all the young people of all stripes are basically for Bernie and Bernie style politics, and they're only going to become more and more influential as they age. And so there's this real tension that's going to build, I think, and I don't know how they're going to deal with that. And it might be the only way to resolve that tension is a realignment where
Hmm.
the Republican Party becomes, less racist and less
Hmm.
socially conservative, and then that brings a lot of Democrats over, including maybe even upper class Latinos and Black people and that kind of thing who are, maybe more fiscally conservative and that kind of thing.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. I think you said something in there that really jumped out to me, and I started reading a note from my producer. Damn it, David, you threw me off, David. I was listening. Hell, shit, I done forgot now, man. It was, but I agree. I think with everything that you just said, but I think the realignment is happening now, and I think it is. It started not just because of the people running from the Republican Party, but it started because the Democratic Party had to pull out all of the stops to suppress this progressive movement. And that included going against things that have been in the standard lexicon for the Democrats, right? They've gone against it so much that, in a way, for those that are actively engaged, right? There's a whole lot of people who don't know what the hell is going on right now. But those who are actively engaged, you see that the Democrats have turned coat on single payer. They've turned coat on, I mean, hell, they already got rid of and gutted welfare. Obama himself gutted food stamps by $8 billion or so, give or take a billion. We've seen them do it progressively, and that's the wrong word to use there. We've seen them do it incrementally over the last 30, 40 years, but in this election alone, they have had to damn all of these progressive ideas and rewrite what it means to be a progressive just to beat this movement that Bernie Sanders put together. So I think the real question, and I want to get your give you the last word and get your feedback on this thought. I think the real question is how Bernie Sanders supporters, millennials, young people, and the older people who support Bernie Sanders, how effective can they be electorally? Because if they can form a coalition outside of the mainstream and be effective electorally, then that would solidify this this theorized realignment that we're discussing.
Yeah, and that's really the million-dollar question, I guess. When the campaign ends, a lot of people are gonna may disengage, and the
Yep.
whole thing just kind of fizzles out. Or I guess the consensus seems to be that the next move is to kind of go locally and use our sort of activist energy to overwhelm the party and local races and stuff like that, where people are maybe paying less attention. And I don't know. I have no idea if that's going to happen or not. Bernie's kind of old,
Yeah.
so if the Bernie brand, I don't know how long the Bernie brand's going to be here to coordinate people. But right now it seems like he's able to kind of point people at candidates, and it just like shoots a money gun at them every time he does it. So that's kind of promising if that's able to last, because if Bernie can basically curate candidates and people trust his judgment on that, then we might be able to swing some primaries and get some good people in there to slowly build the movement. Sort of Tea Party style, I guess, is the way that
Well, they already call
people.
us. They already call us Tea Partiers, the Tea Party of the
Yeah,
left.
yeah,
Yep.
we're the Tea
Matt,
Party left.
hey,
But hey, they were effective.
exactly. Don't discount your enemy just because you don't like them. They had effective strategies, but that's a whole different conversation I want to have with you on another day. Matt, listen, thanks so much for joining me. Tell everybody, I mean, you have like what, 250,000 followers, so they probably already follow you, but tell everybody how to find you and get up with you online.
All right, thanks so much.
Oh, you must. Okay, I think there's some lag going on here. I wanted you to know. I wanted you to give us a shout out in terms of where to find you. Where can they find you online? Give them your Twitter handle and
Sorry.
whatnot. Yeah, we got to.
It's just Matt Bruenig. Bruenig, Matt Bruenig, at Matt Bruenig at twitter.com.
Yep,
That's
that's
probably
it.
the where I spend most of my time.
All right, Matt. Hey, thanks so much for joining me, man.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, folks. I just got word that there's some lag going on. So I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry if you missed any portions of that conversation because it was, trust me, that was a great conversation. That's the conversation in terms of where do we go from here.